All right. So, our last few lectures here are going to be covering chapters 41 and 42, looking at ecosystems and communities specifically, as well as this field of ecology. So, when we're looking at this field of ecology, we're talking about structure, function, behavior, interaction of the natural systems that comprise the biosphere. Okay. So, we're looking at living organisms, how they interact with one another, and then also how they interact with the non living environment as well. So, all of these interactions compose this field of ecology. So, when we're looking at community interactions, we're looking at all of the populations, so all of the different groups of species and how they're interacting with one another within communities. So, a couple of terms that we look at when we're looking at community interactions, and these played a role in natural selection and evolution as well. We look at species richness, which looks at the number of different species that exist within a habitat. So, our picture in the top right here, we've got zebra, there are water buffalo, or they might be Cape buffalo. And then there are various species of grasses, and it's likely there are lions hiding somewhere. And so those are all different species that exist in this area. So the species richness would count the different types of species that exist there. Now, a niche are all the factors in an organism's environment. So we're looking at all of the interactions that exist there. So we're looking at space. So where do they actually live? What type of habitat do they take advantage of? The food that they eat. Some organisms are very specific. They will eat only specific seeds from a specific plant. Some things like rats will eat literally anything. And then we're also looking at climate. What is the temperature of the area at certain times? What is the amount of precipitation that the area receives? So these are all of the factors that this specific organism needs to survive. And this is the role that they play within their environment. So when we're looking at a niche, we're also looking at factors that limit living things. So, what is keeping these organisms from reproducing to their maximum extent? So, what are the environmental resistances? Um, and so we see things like temperature. Okay, we look at deserts. Only specialized species can live in deserts. You wouldn't be able to take something from a tropical rainforest, plop it down in a desert, and expect it to survive. Okay. You're going to have too extreme of temperatures throughout the day. Your light availability is going to impact things like plants more so than animals, but it will have an impact on some animals as well. Oxygen content and carbon dioxide content to a limited degree in our atmosphere. This is a big deal if there are huge shifts. These two things are probably more important on the small scale in aquatic environments, where if your dissolved oxygen content gets too low, a lot of animal species wouldn't be able to exist there. And then, of course, precipitation. Some organisms require more water than others. Think something like a cacti doesn't need a whole lot of water. But then we look at trees in the rainforest require loads of water. Okay. And so only one of these factors needs to be out of its optimum level to cause stress for an organism. So to impact its chemical reactions and its ability to survive and reproduce and so on. So when we look at these factors, okay, we see in this graph we've got an optimum range. Okay. And within this optimum range, that organism, in this case a plant, is going to grow the best. Okay. Everything's good within the optimum range. In this case, it's going to be taller than it would be. You can then go on, and as we get outside of that optimum range, we are in the zones of stress. So in these areas, the plant still survives. it does okay, but it can't do as well as within its optimal range. Okay. So we can live in these different habitats, but it might not do quite as well. These lines at the end are our limits of tolerance. Okay. These are where the organism can live at this edge of this zone of tolerance, but if you get anywhere beyond it, it can't survive and it will die. Our range of tolerance is within those limits of tolerance. It can survive in between any of those specific regions. Okay? And so then we've got our synergistic effects. So if you've got multiple factors out of whack, then you're going to have an even larger impact on that organism. So let's say temperature is too high and precipitation is too low. Okay, those are going to add together and they're really going to impact that organism more so than if just one of them was outside of that optimal range. Okay, so here we see zones of tolerance, temperature, and nutrients with various carp species. So some of them live in colder, clearer waters, some in make a big range, some require warmer. And so we see these differences that exist within these organisms, and they live in different types of temperature water and then the clarity of the water as well. So they have different niches. They're going to occupy different areas dependent on how they survive the best. There are three categories of community interactions. So, interactions that happen between organisms within communities. We've got competition, where they share a resource, but they have to fight over it because it's limited. We've got predator prey interaction, which I'm sure we're all well aware of. One organism eats another. And then we've got symbiosis, which is a close relationship between two different organisms. And there are quite a few different types of that symbiosis. So, first off, here we're going to look at competition. And we've got a couple of different types here. We have interspecific competition. The prefix inter means between. So, interspecific competition is competition between different species. Okay, so they occupy the same ecological niche, so they live in the same habitat, take advantage of the same foods. So here we've got a lioness and some hyenas, okay, probably fighting over some kill because they're competing over the same food. And this is stressful for all organisms involved. Okay, they are now using energy to compete with one another rather than putting that energy to getting more food or producing offspring, whatever it might be. Okay. If two species are competing for a limited resource and one is better at competing for that resource than the other, and they only compete over this one resource and they can't branch out to other things, we could get competitive exclusion, where one species outcompetes and eliminates the other. Okay. Something that we observe in nature is resource partitioning. And so, organisms, as a way to reduce competition, now it's important to note they don't get together and decide this. This just happens through natural selection, where those groups that do this resource partitioning, each species is better able to survive because it reduces stress within all of the species. And so we see they live in the same trees, but they occupy different parts of the tree and eat different insects within different parts of the tree. So they've taken this habitat, split it up between them, and so now they limit the amount of competition that exists between them. Okay. Intra-specific competition. Intra means within. So this is competition within a species, fighting for food, fighting for mates, whatever it might be. And this is going to keep population numbers down because they're using energy for this. Okay, so in our next video, we're going to look at a couple more examples and trying to figure out if we have inter or intra-specific competition.